Welcome back to part 2 of this video series about building your startup product on Turbo 360. My name is Alex Valerosi, and I'm going to be continuing with this series showing you exactly how to build your product on a Turbo 360 Vertex. So last time we left off with registering a user, and we can see that route here in our authentication or auth route. So that route is auth register. So we know what happens is that when we are in the on the index page and somebody enters some data into our sign-up form, like their full name, email address, and password, then actually this label here should say password, then the data will be posted to this auth route, and Turbo will create a user using the data that we passed in, and then it will return some response in the form of a success or a failure. So today what we're going to be doing is showing you how to log the user in and create a session. And after that, we're going to create a dashboard page where it shows some dynamic data about the user, like for example, their full name or their email address. It's a little bit customized and tailored for the user so that they can, have this private dashboard space where they can create some kind of resource like a dog sitting reservation in our case. So to start off with that, the only thing that I did here that's different from what we had last time was I created a login form. It's exactly the same as the sign up form, except this one only has 2 fields here, email address and password. So once again, I'll make this change here, password. Now the action for this form is a different route. The method is still post, but the action is auth login. Now we did not create this route last time, so we're going to do that today. All right, so once you're done creating your login form, you can pause the video here and copy mine if you'd like. Then you're going to go ahead and open up your auth route file. Right below the register route, we're going to do router.post/login and create a new function right inside here. Okay, so once we have this route, we can see what exactly we get from the user when they submit something to it. So let's cd into the project and then start our dev server. Okay, cool. So here we are, we have our form. Doesn't look very nice, but that's okay. We're not really after aesthetics now, just functionality. So we'll put in a test user here, and we'll make the password just test and click login. So you'll notice that it's going to load forever because we didn't send any response to the browser. But if we come over here, we can see that we got an email address and password, which is exactly what we're looking for. Right, perfect. So if we go ahead over to the Turbo documentation, which you can find at turbo360.co/docs, you'll see the login function that's available on the Turbo node module. So let's go ahead and copy that back into this route, turbo.login, and it expects the user's credentials, which come in the form of an object with email and password. You can see an example of that right here. Since we post it directly to the route, we can just use rec.body. Now, since this returns a promise, we can use .then and get some kind of result. And we can send that result back to the front end and see exactly what happens. If there's an error, we can handle that as well using a catch. Okay, cool. So let's double check the documentation, make sure we got that correct. Turbo.login credentials, .then data, and a callback, .catch, and an error. Perfect. So if we go ahead and test this out, oh, looks like we had a small mistake here. Unexpected token. Okay, that was a very, very, very dumb mistake. So basically, I just completely neglected to use the response.json and just put a random object in there, which is why it was erroring out. So if we go ahead and reload this page, we should be able to log in with the user that we created last time. Okay, so we got a failure, which means that the user probably doesn't exist or just didn't, for whatever reason, appear. I just maybe got the wrong password. So let's go ahead and try a different password because maybe I have a feeling that was the wrong password. I'm going to take a look at my dashboard and see if I, in fact, do have a user. I do, but what is the password? I'm going to just delete this user, create a new one just for testing purposes here. Okay. Okay, perfect. Now, if we go back to the home route, we can log into that user. Okay, perfect. So we successfully logged into the account that we created just now. And it gave us back the full object of the user. Obviously, it won't return the password back because that would be insecure. But it does give us every property that we saved on the user's profile. So this could be really useful for our dashboard page. Now, one thing that we need to do within this login route is actually persist a session. So if we go back over to the Turbo 360 dashboard and open up the documentation, you'll notice one line here in the login function where we're setting the session equal to the user's ID. So we're going to go ahead and copy this line and paste it right back in here so that we now have a session and the user will be persisted throughout the application. So now if we go ahead back and we log in again, now the user is logged in with a session and persisted throughout the application so we can still access that user property on another route. And that other route that we're going to access the user's information on is the dashboard route. So we're going to make sure that the user is signed in before we allow them to access the dashboard route. And then we're going to send some data about the user to that page. So let's open up our index file here. And you can see I already created a dashboard route here. So let me go ahead line by line and explain exactly what this does. So we're using a router.get because the user will be getting this dashboard page. And then here we are making sure that the user is logged in. So if there is no vertex session, then we're just going to simply redirect them to the landing page. Also, if there's no user object on the vertex session, redirect them to the landing page. And the reason that we check for this first is because if the vertex session is null and we try to check for the user property, then it will just crash because you can't get a, if the vertex session is undefined and you try to access a object on that, it's just going to cause a crash. So the next thing that we're going to do is, since we have the user ID from the vertex session, we're going to have to fetch the whole user object. So you can see this in the documentation over here. We're using the turbo.fetchUser call and passing in the user ID property. And then we're simply we're getting back the response with the full user object. So if you look here, this data property is going to be the user that we got back from the fetch user call. Then we're going to simply render the dashboard route and pass the user into that route as an object. So we can go ahead and construct our dashboard page using our index as an example, and then we can basically show you how to display that user object on the dashboard page. So I just copied and pasted everything from that page really quick. Let's go ahead and remove some stuff that we don't need, like this login form. I'm gonna go ahead and remove the header as well, because it's kind of unnecessary. Oops. And we don't really need this section here either. Let's fill this in with some copy to make it stand out as a dashboard page. And we're going to simply save it as dashboard.mustache. It's saved as an HTML file. This happens all the time. So we're just going to go ahead and Command-Shift-Save, which will allow us to remove the extension and then delete this HTML file. That happens a lot, so don't be surprised if it happens to you. Okay, great. So now that we're logged in and we have a route set up for the dashboard, I should be able to access this route, and it will use the vertex session, so the currently logged in user, to allow me to actually visit that route. So let's go ahead to Google Chrome and see if we can visit the dashboard route. Okay, great. So I'm logged in, but how do I know what user is logged in here? Like, how can I show some of that data that we passed in to the actual page, right? So we passed that data in here as an object, second parameter of the res.render call. How can we use that? So we can use something called mustache templates. So let's pass in, for example, we know that the user has a name, right? So let's pass in user.name, okay? So this user object here corresponds to this object here. And then name is just a property. I can also use like email. I could pass in the ID. Basically anything that is a property of the user. So go ahead and save that and then reload the page. Cool, so it shows my name here. Now, we can also do some useful things with, for example, adding an image. You can add pretty much any property, like an image as a URL, or something similar to that. So you can see how powerful this can be just by simply saving, properties on a user object in the database. Great. So now that we have a dashboard, we're going to want to allow the user to create some kind of resource in the database. Okay, so the whole point of this application is that dog owners can go on here and create like a reservation or an appointment with a dog sitter, so that they can get their dog, watched or walked whenever. So we want a dog owner to be able to post some time and date where they need their dog watched. So basically, what we need before that, though, is to create an API to be able to handle that data. Okay, so go ahead and open your API route. This is the sample that was basically provided with when you download Turbo, but we're going to go ahead and just get rid of this because we don't need that resource route there. We're going to create our own. So we'll start with a simple router.get, and this is going to represent our resource in the database. So we'll call it reservation. Okay, and pass a function into that. So what we want here is to be able to get this resource from the database. That's going to be the first step. So if you open up the Turbo documentation, we can go back here just to the docs and the data store. We can see that it shows us how to create objects and retrieve objects from the database. So what we're going to want is this turbo.fetch here, okay? Fetching multiple entities with a query filter is also supported by the data store, which is exactly what we're going to do. So within our route here, we're going to use turbo.fetch, pass in our resource, and for now we want to fetch all reservations. So we're just going to pass in a blank object. That's going to be our query. It's just going to query for all reservations, without leaving anything out. Within our callback, we're just going to pass in the data that we received as a response, and then send that back to the front end. If there's an error, we can catch it. And that's good to go. However, there are no reservations in the database right now. So we are going to have to also create a route to create reservations. So that's going to be a post to the reservations route. And now we're going to use the turbo.create resource here. So basically do the same thing. And we're going to pass rec.body in, just like we did before when we were creating a user. And we're going to reply with a successful confirmation and some data. So I'm just going to take a quick second to explain some of these things a little bit more in detail so you kind of get an idea for why I'm making certain decisions. So within the API routes, I always want to reply with JSON, okay? JSON simply means JavaScript object notation, and it's a simple object that I'm sending back to the front end. Replying with JSON instead of, maybe reloading the page or redirecting to a different route is important for the API because it'll allow us to make what's called an AJAX request from the front end. An asynchronous JavaScript and XML, that's what it stands for, request without reloading the page. So we can get some of these, we can get the reservations from the front end at any time, without forcing the user to reload the page. I'm going to show you how this works later on when we actually build the list page for the reservations, but keep in mind that that's why we're sending JSON back from the reservations route. For something like authentication, it might actually make more sense to redirect the user. So in this login route, for example, once the user is logged in, we can just send them straight to the dashboard because we know that they're logged in. They can go straight there, okay? If there's an error, we might want to send them to an error page, or we can just redirect them back home. So like this error here means that they did not log in successfully, okay? So these redirecting from something like this makes a lot of sense because it's not an API route, it's authentication. You already know where the user's going after they've successfully logged in here. So I'm just going to take a quick second to architect this in the appropriate way just to show you kind of best practices here. So once the user is registered, we can also create a session and then redirect them to the dashboard because they have just successfully registered and remove this JSON response. For the errors right now, I'm just going to leave it as JSON, but that can be changed at a later time. So let me explain the architecture then of the index page. So this always renders a page. Okay, the index route will always render a page. These JSON routes and the send examples are just examples that were basically put into the template as like some boilerplate to show you kind of an example of what to do. But for the index, we always want to render a page. So this slash represents the index page. When you go to the dashboard, the user should expect to see the dashboard page. The same thing for this error. I'm going to leave it as a JSON for now. But if there's ever an error in the future, just keep in mind that we'll probably just render an error page or redirect to an error page. So the pattern that I'm showing you here is index route will always render, auth will almost always redirect, and API will almost JSON. So it'll almost always send a JSON back, okay? This can be deleted as well. That was just a quick example. But now you're starting to see that the pattern in the routes of the application. Okay, so let's catch this error here and continue on creating our API. The API, as you'll notice here, has a couple of methods that we want to account for. Those are called CRUD methods: create, read, update, and delete. So our create method is handled by this post, right? Because we're creating a new reservation. Our read is handled by a get because we're reading these reservations from the data store. Update is going to be handled by a put request, which we will do later. And delete will be handled by a delete request so that we can delete a reservation. Okay? But for now, this will be just fine. Now that we have this post request here, we can go ahead and on our dashboard page, make it possible for the user to create a new reservation. So let's go ahead and do a new form here. I'm just going to copy this login form from before and adapt it to what I need for a reservation. Our action here is going to be the reservations. And our method is a post. Okay, so that method is going to match up to this method here, post, and we're using /API/reservations. This is the API route, and here is reservations. So we know that matches up perfectly. Another thing that we want to do here is protect it just like we protected the dashboard route. Even though they're only going to be able to access this form from the dashboard, it's still possible for an attacker to just post to this route from like their terminal or something like that. So we want to just make sure that the user is logged in when they're creating a new reservation. If not, we can just redirect them to the home page. Okay, so what properties are going to be on the reservation? Let's call this dog's name. Okay, and let's take a look at what is available to us as far as date inputs go. Looks like an input type equals date. Okay. Okay, that's fine. So we can use input type equals date. Our placeholder will be 2018. What's today's date? 02/08. And this is going to be label of date. Okay, so if we go back to our dashboard and reload the page, we'll see a new form for a new reservation. So let's go ahead and create this this new reservation. So I'll use my dog's name here, and let's say I want a dog sitter for February 10th. It's a couple days from now. 2018, and go ahead and create. So you'll notice that that worked perfectly. It posted our reservation to the website. However, what happened was it reloaded the page. So that's not necessarily the effect that we want to go for, and that's something that we can handle using the Ajax that I was explaining before. Okay. But for now, we can just leave it as is and demonstrate how to also retrieve it. Just to show that this actually posted to a live data store, even though we're still on localhost, we can go into our Turbo 360 dashboard and pull up the dog sitter app here and then show the data store. You can see if we go to reservations here, these actually can be deleted. These were old ones from a test. This is the reservation that was just created. So here's the date, here's the dog's name, and that's good to go. So, oops. So let's say we want to show only the reservations that were created by this user. I find that it helps almost with every single resource to just add a property to the resource for an owner. So rec.body.owner equals rec.vertex session. So this tells us basically who created the resource. And then later on, we can retrieve it by the owner's ID. So we can display it on their dashboard to show them their active reservations, for example. So let's go ahead and create a new reservation now with an owner property. So go ahead and let's call this, I have another dog named Duncan. Let's do it for the 11th, 2018. And create a new reservation. So now we see that the owner ID here matches my user ID that is currently logged in. So now what we're going to do is show how we can get access to a specific reservation using a specific property on that object. So let's do a router.get, and we're going to use reservations. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and do that. Actually, you know what? We can just reuse the same route. And what we're going to do here is pass in the rec.body. So the difference that makes here is that instead of just passing in a blank object, if we pass in a blank object, it would retrieve the entire store of reservations. But since we're passing in now the rec.body, we can just retrieve the whole store, or we can retrieve some reservation by a specific property. So let's go over to our dashboard route and show how we can make those reservations available on the dashboard. So here, we're going to cut out this line, and we're going to return turbo.fetch, and we want the reservations, and we want the owner to be equal to the ID of the user that we just fetched from the database. We can chain this with another response and basically render. Oops. Let's make this a little bit more expressive here. And then we can basically render this response on the dashboard. And so this is going to be So this is only going to show us the reservations that were created by the owner, by the user that's logged in, okay? So what you're gonna notice here though, is that we have a problem a common problem with promises is that you may want to quote unquote return two values, which isn't possible. You can't return more than one value from from any function in JavaScript. It's just not possible. It's not, something that any language is or should be capable of. So what we're going to want to do is return an object with the two values, the user and this call. And then instead of using a then, we're going to use .spread and put this in parentheses and match up the user here with the first pair here, with the first element of the array here. And then the reservations is going to be the response from this call to turbo.fetch. Okay, and then we can go ahead and render dashboard, the dashboard page, passing in the user and the reservations property right there. And so that should work fine for us. So if we reload the page, the dashboard page, we should see no errors, which is great. Now we just want to actually display these reservations on the dashboard. So go ahead back to your dashboard page here, and we can create another, we'll just do it right below the form here. We'll make this a unordered list because that makes sense. And what we're going to want to do is use that powerful mustache templating yet again to basically iterate over the list of reservations and display them on the site. So we know we received reservations. We're going to have to put a £sign there because that means that we're working with an array. And we can use the dog name here and the date here. Okay, so now if we go ahead and reload this page, it's going to show us a list of the reservations that we made. So let's go ahead and make another one. Now, obviously, it doesn't show the one that I created earlier because we didn't have the owner property set up yet. So this is going to be, we'll use the name Turbo. We'll set it for February 12th, 2018, and then create a new reservation. Okay, so this shows you that we successfully created it. And if we go back to the dashboard page, there it is. It appears right in the list. Now we can style this any way we want, but this just shows how powerful, creating an API can be and using these mustache templates to show some data on the site. Okay, so that's going to be it for this tutorial. And next time we're going to go a little bit more in depth with the API, with showing some Ajax and additional stuff like that. So thanks for watching and hope to catch you.